Right. So Melody is with us today, as is Megan Walters from the Career Center, which really appreciate. And this session is really about I did not realize that we would be dealing with a pandemic at the same time when we were scheduling this. I guess there's some relevance, even more so now, even though the job search is challenging to begin with. So before I ask some questions that I have, Melody, could you kind of share your own experience and how you?
Yeah, I can do that.
Great, thank you.
All right. So you can hear me okay, I assume. Yeah, so okay, great. Let's see. I took some time off between undergrad and graduate school, probably like 4 years maybe, before I decided that I wanted to go into a master's program for library science. And uh, I went to NCCU, and they have like different tracks. So you can do like an academic track or a public track. So I did academic. So I knew that I wanted to be in the academic library. And then I graduated um, December of 2016. So right after the election. Um, and yeah, and so like I immediately started applying to jobs, and I wasn't super concerned about it at first because I guess like previously I never really had too much trouble getting jobs. Um, but I wasn't also applying to jobs like this where it was like sort of a long-term career. But for whatever reason, I felt like it would be fine. Even though I had people telling me like it might be a little challenging. So pretty much most of 2017 was just a sad series of me applying to jobs and getting rejected. Um, and it was there was a lot of times where I would get to sort of like the final um, process of like an interview. Like I would do the phone interview, and then I would go visit the campus, and then like still wouldn't get the job. Which over time it's just really disheartening. I didn't realize how disheartening it could be, but it was sort of a reality check for me. Um, and there's a couple of things that I feel like uh, I could have done better to sort of like prepare for this. For one, when I was in grad school, it was a distance learning program, and um, I didn't really have any mentors. I think that was like a huge thing that did me a disservice was I didn't have anybody telling me, oh, you should maybe try checking out these conferences and going to that and like networking. I didn't really understand how people did that or like where to like step into that. I did do an internship at a community college for a summer semester, but uh, it was such minimal experience that um it was hard to justify that when people were asking me like, oh well, what's your teaching experience, and all I had was sort of this 2 month experience in the summertime. So it yeah, there was just a lot of challenges. I think that also uh I was sort of, in terms of like schooling, was kind of trained as a just general librarian, general reference librarian. And I think that it's becoming more difficult to find those types of jobs. I think that there's a lot of more specialty librarian positions. Um, so yeah, there was a lot of things that I thought I could maybe be a good fit for. And I knew that I was somebody who was like adaptable and a great learner, and like I didn't like question my work ethic. It was just about like I lacked experience, and I couldn't get the experience because nobody would hire me. So it was kind of that whole situation. And um, let's see, what else? Yeah, so it took maybe about 8 months of me applying like nonstop to jobs. And I was applying to jobs that like I was not qualified for sure. Like I was getting a little desperate. At some point I was like I would take any job and move anywhere just to get the experience I need, so that I can eventually maybe find the job that I want, which I think was probably not the best idea. um, but yeah, I really felt like I needed something, and a lot of the jobs that I was applying to, even if it said it was entry level, if I got to the interview, they were asking me questions that were clearly not entry level questions. So it just kind of made me, like wonder, are there actually any entry level library jobs? So I think then I also felt like uh, I had to somehow like give them the answer that they wanted to hear instead of like giving them an honest answer. So, I would be like, yes, I do have some teaching experience, and try to like stretch out as much as I could from like the minimal experience that I had. Um, versus just being honest and being like, I only really taught for this amount of time. And then like explaining sort of why I think that I would be good at it in the future or something like that. So yeah, I guess it was just sort of, it was a hard time. And I know a lot of other folks who had similar experiences as me. And then I know people who got jobs right out of grad school. Our librarian, my colleague Joe, is the data visualization librarian, and that's like a very niche specific field. And because of that and their experience, um, they were they felt very like lucky and privileged to be able to get a job right out of grad their grad program. Um, yeah, and I know people who, it took longer. So basically, eventually, I was living in Charlotte at the time. I got a position working part-time at a community college. So maybe like uh, 30 hours a week. Um, and yeah, it was a very small library. I mostly worked the reference desk. I did some, one-on-one consultations, but I was able to build up experience there. And then I, when I kind of like, I just kind of stopped trying to look for jobs, and I stopped being a little bit so like desperate for it. Um, but I was working for the ACRL New York web team. And so every couple of months, I have to like help them do some job postings and stuff. And so I was doing that, and I came across the UNCG Student Success Librarian position. And it was one of those situations where it was like actually entry level, and people like expected it to be entry level, which was a relief. And it also was very student centered. It was outreach center, which I had a lot of experience with, um, in terms of outreach, working with different sort of activist groups in my past. And then also the college I was working at like worked heavily with middle college program, and that was something that was being asked for the student success position. So it was just a really, I don't know, it just like I read the description and there was something inside of me that was like, I can get this job. I don't know what it was, but I was just like, just a gut reaction that was like, I think I would be great at this job. And I applied for it, and um, yeah, I did the whole process. The interview process for an academic library job is very daunting. It's like a 2-day affair. But yeah, I had the dinner, I met the people, it was amazing. When I went on campus, it just felt so different than other interviews I had done in the past. Like the on-campus visit, I like immediately felt comfortable around the people that were interviewing me. It seemed that they felt comfortable around me too. Yeah, it felt like a really good fit. And so I felt pretty confident in it. It did take them like a month and a half to get back to me, which, every single day that you don't hear something, you're like, oh gosh, like I'm getting more insecure about this now. But it was an HR thing. They finally got back to me and I got the job. but it wasn't an easy process.
Thank you for sharing. It sounds really complicated. Um, so one thing that I kind of want to talk about is sort of the emotional aspect and the practical aspect. So emotionally, you talked about kind of you were starting to get desperate and you were applying for lots of different jobs and kind of am interested what are some ways that you kind of kept pushing forward? Like we talked about like desperate. Um, what are some ways that you kind of helped keep your morale up as you were pushing forward and looking for jobs?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say that there were definitely like highs and lows. There were like times where for a week I would be like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to look for any jobs. I'm not going to like search online. I'm just going to continue doing like, whatever part-time job I had at the time, and not think about it. Um, but but then I would always like bounce out of it, and I never like officially put it aside just because I kept reminding myself that even though, oh, now it's like 6 months now we're going on to 7 months of me not finding a job. Um, it's really not as long as it seems. In the moment, it felt like I will never get a job, but I just kept reminding myself, like, you will, like, it's going to happen. And I have enough confidence in myself to know that, like, I would be um, good in whatever job that I would get, but convincing people to hire me is a different thing. Um, so yeah, I think that it was just a matter of really reminding myself that uh, even if I have to wait like a year and a half, like a year and a half is really not that long in the grand scheme of things, even though it feels really long. Luckily, I said it was about 8 months before I finally landed this position, but oh no, I'm sorry, landed my first position as the community college librarian. And then I worked there for about a year and a couple of months before, so I was able to gain experience then. But um, yeah, it is really hard, but like it's what I want to do and what I wanted to do. So I just kept going and pushing through. And I definitely had support from like my friends and my family and other librarians that I knew who were not necessarily mentor type people to me, because we weren't super close, but I had like friends of friends who were librarians who would talk to me and be like, you just have to keep looking. And so yeah, I don't know. I just kept doing it because I knew that I needed to, but honestly, like it felt bad a lot of the times. So I don't know what kind of advice I would give to somebody who's going through the same thing other than like maybe just like be soft with yourself, like don't be so hard on yourself. Especially, like with the uncertainties of the market in the future, considering our current situation. Um, I think it's definitely an opportunity to, yeah, just be a little easier on yourself, even though it might seem like it's never going to happen. It will. Uh, yeah, that's what I would say.
But I think that's something that a lot of people need to hear. It also sounds a little bit like, from your experience, that negative or um, uh, sort of positive feelings are not so indicative that you're in the wrong field. It just hasn't happened for you yet. And um, a lot of people would assume, oh, I feel bad, so therefore I'm in the wrong field. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yes, that's a really good point. That's sort of exactly how I was feeling. I mean, there might have been moments where I might have doubted myself, but um, but for the most part, I stuck to the like, the vision or like what I wanted to do. I didn't, there wasn't a whole lot of me like questioning, did I make the right decision in like doing this grad program? I mean, that was also driven by the fact that like I had just worked really hard and spent all this money on my grad program. And I was like, I'm definitely not going to go back and do a different program to find a different job now. Um, but yeah, I think that the emotional part of it, I guess I just like understood that that was part of it and that was going to be part of the journey and didn't let it deter me from trying still. But I just had to keep reminding myself, like, this is just a low point in my life, and people go through these times in their life sometimes, and it's going to get better. And sometimes hearing that is like when you're in the low point is like, okay, yeah, sure, easy for you to say, but like reminding myself that pretty regularly, even if I was like skeptical of my own like advice that I was giving myself, um, somehow got me through it.
Um, before we move on from the more emotional aspect to the more practical things, I'm kind of wondering if you had any rituals or practices that you did to kind of symbolize an accomplishment. So, like, every time you applied for a job or every time you heard back from an interview or you went on an interview, did you do something that kind of rewarded you for having that small success?
Yeah, it's kind of silly actually, but I didn't really think of it as uh like a reward, but those, like I mentioned, those interviews are really challenging, especially the in-person ones, which I did a couple of, and it usually requires like traveling somewhere or like being flown somewhere and then preparing a presentation and so on. So it's just really draining. And I feel like no matter who you are, you would come out of that like feeling very like mentally, emotionally, physically exhausted. So basically every single time I did that, my partner would come pick me up from the airport and I would want to go to this very specific diner called the Midnight Diner and it's open 24/7 and I would order like 12 chicken wings because that was just like what I needed at the time. So yeah, it was like it became a thing because like the first time I went on an interview, like when I was flown out and like did the thing, when I came back, I was feeling like pretty good about it, but I wasn't super sure. Um, but yeah, it was late. I was tired. I was flying back from Florida. There was a huge thunderstorm, so my flight got delayed a bunch of times. And by the time I got back to Charlotte, I was just like, I need to eat meat right now. So we did that. And then we did it like again the second time, like it happened, like being picked up. I was like, let's go to the Midnight Diner. So it kind of became a ritual, but I guess I didn't really think of it that way until you just asked the question.
Thank you. Um, that's that's great, and I think one of the really puts into practical framework being soft with yourself. You know, not to reward yourself after you get a job, but like helping to motivate you beyond. From moment to moment. Um, in the more practical aspect, you mentioned a couple of things that I was really interested in, which is that you were applying nonstop and you kind of were suggested that maybe you were a little suspicious of that beforehand. So I think, or after you did that. So I guess I think that's the natural inclination for a lot of people. I know it is for me. Like, it just feels like something to be doing. And so therefore, if I'm doing something, then I'm obviously making progress, which is not necessarily true. So if someone is sort of on that line of like, I'm not really sure I should stop applying nonstop to all kinds of random jobs, what might you suggest to that person to help them feel more comfortable with what they're doing and applying for jobs, but maybe applying for like literally everything that they see? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think I get what you're asking. Um, let's see. Well, I do think that it also depends on your situation. Um, I was in a place where uh, I took out a loan so that I could like keep on paying all of my bills and stuff and uh, be able to look for a job for the year. So I like prepared for the year of 2017 being the year that I um, search for this job so that I could work a little less at my current job that I had at the time, um, and try to find something. But I knew that that money was going to run out eventually. So um, I think that if you're in a financial situation where you really need to find the job soon, it totally makes sense that you would, just put in applications anywhere and see where it takes you. Um, I do think that there are benefits to that. I think that it really sort of trained me how to tailor cover letters, because I really did apply for all kinds of jobs. And, I was not that person who had just one cover letter that I used all the time. I like tailored it to what they were asking for. So I feel like I got better at that. And then I was also able to get a lot of interview experience from that. But at the same time, I do think that uh, it got to a point where, you know, that sort of desperation, I think, was kind of, um, it was kind of preventing me from seeing like what I really like, why I really wanted to do this in the first place. Um, because I remember there was one time where I applied for this job, and for whatever reason, I don't know. It was like it was a very like tech savvy job in the library. It was like working in their makerspace, and um, I knew that I was probably not the best person for that job. But I did a phone interview, and I talked to some of my strengths, but I didn't think I would get a call back, and I did, and they were like, "Yeah, we want to fly you out, and um, can you give us a presentation on some of the like um, any kind of web stuff that you've created?" And I was like, "Well, I haven't created any web stuff other than like I don't know basic stuff that's already out there, like a blog or something, But like other than that, I hadn't I didn't have that much experience, so I was like how can I was starting to think like, is there a way I can like convince these people that I know what I'm doing? And then I was like, it's just not gonna work, like that's I shouldn't have to do that, and like they shouldn't have to hire someone who is like pretending. So I called them back and I was like, hey, listen, I actually don't have the like I don't feel confident in my experience to be a good fit for this job. And that was like me turning down an opportunity. Because I think that it would have been so stressful for me, and I wouldn't have been happy. And even if they were willing to like put a lot of training in, um, it just didn't feel right to like try and like trick these people into hiring me. So I think after that, I sort of had this like realization, like I really need to be looking for the job that's right for me. I know that that's like sort of a luxury, but I, I wanted my first experience to not um and feel like I'm like drowning in imposter syndrome or something, you know? So I would say definitely keep looking, but I would I would maybe focus on a few things that you felt like were your strong point and then try to find jobs that align with that. So like I knew that I really wanted to have a job that was very student centered. I knew that I wanted to be working with students and I wanted to be teaching students and I knew that I wanted to do a lot of outreach. So I stopped looking for, I stopped paying attention to the jobs that, um, you know, in the job description would say like you will not be teaching, you know? So that was like something like I knew that I wanted. So sort of focusing on maybe just like one or two like big aspects of the job that you would like to have and then looking for jobs that way. And it does mean that there might be less that you find. Um, but I think it also felt a little bit more relieving to like just let it go and kind of just accept that uh, it might take longer this way, but I'll probably be happier in the long run.
And that definitely makes sense. And that's a really great point. Um, you also mentioned the importance of mentorship and um, also ACRL. So I think a lot of times when people are searching for jobs, it can be easy to let the associations where you might develop some of those mentorships that you, if you didn't have that in school or at your previous job, they might let some of that fall away to the sides, like, oh, I can't really deal with that right now. I got to do something else. Um, what would be the benefit of sticking with like something like ACRL or NCLA or ALA as these professional organizations beyond the fact that you would see job postings?
That's a good question. I think that, uh, well, when I was in my graduate program, there was only one professor that I had who sort of required us to look into um, these associations um, and become a member of one. um, which, you know, was also asking his students to spend, you know, 60 plus dollars if they had it for a 1 year membership of something. Um, and honestly, like, I just didn't really understand what the membership like could offer. Like, I would look at these websites and you know, see like some professional development like stuff, but it just I guess like it still felt a little out of my reach, but um it was just like a really great opportunity to sort of like brush up on stuff that I had learned in my grad program. And then you know, it just like it sort of gave me the terminology that I needed. It sort of like let me see like what trends were happening. So I do think that there's a benefit there. Um, I do wish that these things were cheaper though, especially for people looking for jobs. Um, but honestly, I would say that the um, it's interesting because I wasn't even a member of ACRL at the time, even though I was helping the New York branch with their website. Um, Somehow that did not give me like a free opportunity to join ACRL, and it was just really expensive, so I didn't join it. So I would just look at whatever was, you know, available for free. Um, but sort of being working within ACRL but not being a member was like really weird because I was able to see a lot of things like on their site just because I had access to the site. I was like posting to their website. So I was able to see stuff anyway in terms of their branch specifically. Um, but yeah, I think that there's definitely benefits to them. And I would say if you can afford it, I would look into, you know, either one of the big ones, ALA or ACRLA, and definitely maybe consider like a local one. I think the local one is really great, especially if you don't plan on moving too far for your job. You kind of sort of want to stay within the state or the general Southeast region. Um, I think that's a really good opportunity because you'll be seeing stuff that is like directly related to that area and like getting to know like names and uh, I don't know, sort of different trends that people are trying in, universities and colleges. So uh, I do think that's a benefit. But like I mentioned, I didn't really have a really good mentor, so there wasn't anybody to tell me like, hey, like I know this is really expensive, but it's worth doing. So I didn't even really join a membership. Um, I did in grad school with the one professor who required it, but like I didn't really join any of the bigger ones until I had that first library job when I could afford it. So that's definitely something that I would have liked to have done sooner. Um, but like it was one of those situations where it's like you don't know what you don't know. So like I didn't know that it would be this amazing resource because like I wasn't really told that and I couldn't really access some of that.
That's a really great, especially if this professional memberships are new to you, or never did something like this before, been in a program like this, it might be really challenging to see yourself as part of this group, or is this being something that you can have access to? So, in a related question about mentorship is, I think, so I'm an on-campus student, so I get to meet a lot of different people, and relationships sort of kind of happen naturally. There are a lot of distance students at UNCG, especially in our program. We're all distance students because we're all online. So I guess my question is, what about people who are a little nervous? Maybe there may be or they're unsure, like if they're making a positive impression on an instructor. What would be some tips that you would suggest as they kind of figure out how to gain a figure out how to participate in being having mentorship?
Yeah, I the thing with the mentors is I think that for me there was a little bit of cultural difference because um like I'm mixed Korean American and in like Korean culture it there's like a really strong like mentorship culture. So you have like a sunbae who is like the mentor, someone who might be a couple years older than you or somebody who's been a job longer than you, and like it they just it's just known that they will like help you out, like they will like come to you so you don't have to go to them. And I a part of me sort of wishes that that culture was a little bit more of the norm, sort of like in America or like Western cultures, because I think that I think that just like sort of understanding that new people are going to come in and like you have this knowledge and you have this opportunity to make it a little bit easier for them. I do kind of think that the person who in that situation sort of has the upper hand or has like, you know, the seniority can reach out to somebody who's not. So that's like when I first started, my colleague Deborah, who is also Korean American, she knows about this culture. So she immediately like reached out to me. And I was very lucky for that. Like she uh, emailed me as soon as she found out that I got the job before like I even started. And she was like, "So, are you going to move up here? Do you need help moving? Like, do you want me to like help you unpack? Like, do you want to get dinner?" And it was like not just like in the job stuff, but like helping me acclimate to Greensboro in general. So I kind of do think that although like, you know, not everybody thinks that way, or no, you know, thinks to like even consider that. But, you know, I do think people are like, I'm definitely willing to help people ask, that sometimes asking can be very scary. Um, but I do suggest that uh, that students try to find somebody, because having a mentor, I feel like, is a huge help. Once I got my job at the community college, my supervisor was a really great mentor to me there. She was definitely, you know, always sending me opportunities for professional development, and sending me things to read and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that it was that was really helpful. And it was just we just worked very closely. Because it was such a small library. It was only three of us. It was like we just saw each other often. So that sort of like developed naturally. Um, but yeah, I think that reaching out to people that might have similar jobs to something that you want to do. So I know I've had a couple of students reach out to me because they are interested in sort of student engagement, outreach, and you know they see my job and they're interested and curious of what that means. And so like I've had students come and talk to me about it, and once I see them take that initial step, I will like then follow up with them. So even if they asked me to or not, I would follow up with them, and see how they're doing, if they have any questions, that kind of stuff. um, I think a simple email to some people is fine. I mean, I think that's fine. I don't know if there's, maybe Megan could speak to this, but if there is more of a, um, I don't know, etiquette around that. But I think emailing somebody, that's what students did for me. And just being like, hey, I sort of am interested in your position. I'd like to learn more about it. Um, would it be possible for us to set up a meeting and talk? Um, and I think that was, I think that's a good approach to do. That's something that I didn't do when I was in grad school because I didn't know any of the librarians at the school that I got my degree in, because I was a distance learning. And so like, yeah, you know, I like only knew my professors who weren't necessarily like working as librarians. So I didn't know who to reach out to. I didn't, I reached out to a couple of people who are local, and asked them questions, hoping that, you know, maybe they would get back to me and be like, hey, do you want to set up a meeting or something? But they would just answer the emailed questions, and that was kind of it. Um, so it did kind of feel like, oh, maybe I was bothering this person. Um, but yeah, I think that you kind of have to like get over that and sort of really advocate for yourself, because I think people really do forget what it feels like to be new, um, to be early career, to be searching, how scary it can be. Um, and if somebody is not responsive, I would say just maybe move on. But I do really wish that the culture was more of like people reaching out to those uh, who are first, you know, who are getting started, to make the like first step, so that, you know, the other person can kind of save face and we can kind of just put them at ease a little bit. Like, I'm going to come to you and ask you all these questions first. Um, so you don't have to, you know, feel like you are revealing that you are new and you don't know anything, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah.
Morgan.
Yeah.
Um, this is Megan. Melody, I just wanted to say that, like, I agree with what you said 100%. And you had asked a question about the etiquette around reaching out to folks, and I think that all of the everything that you said is spot on. And I would just reiterate that it's easier to be on the post-grad employed side of things, right? It's easier for us to talk about, oh, these are some things that you can do that will be wonderful. And it's harder to see that when you're in the on the other side of the table, But it has always been my experience that if someone who's in a graduate school program or an undergrad or someone from another institution anywhere, if someone approaches me and says, I'm really interested in the kind of work that you do, can we talk about it? I am like, yes, how long do you have? I just feel like people want to talk about the work that they do. And sometimes it feels like, we can kind of shepherd people into the profession. And that is an exciting thing to do. And I think it brings a lot of joy and pride to the folks who are already employed to be able to give back, right? Because yes, it's hard to remember what it felt like to be searching. But once you tap into that, you can remember how helpful it would have been to have someone talk to you about those things. So absolutely, yes, reach out to people by email. And then just to give a plug for career and professional development, if you're in a situation where you want to reach out to people, but you're just not sure who those people are or how to find them or what to say, our team and a career coach can just absolutely help you navigate that process. But yes, Melody, one thing that you said is like, if people aren't responsive to you, move on to the next. Absolutely. Because there are tons of people out there and lots of folks that you can talk to. So thanks for letting me jump in for a moment.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think students are going to find that advice that you provide really great. Um, Thinking about something that's more that's both practical and I think emotional in some ways is you go on these interviews and you either hear back and it's positive and it's great and you make it through, or you interviews that after a while you're just like you keep over and over and over again. And I think I'm sure there's a lot of different motivations for how to take that with grace and to just sort of be like, it's not me, I just didn't, it's just not the right time or whatever the case may be. Um, was there anything that you did as a follow up to those interviews that kind of helped you to learn something about the next interview that you went on or the next document that you sent to that you applied?
Yeah, so basically anytime after an interview, whether it was just the phone interview and that was it, or I went to the next phase and did the in-person interview, pretty much right after it was over, I would give myself a break because it was very, challenging. But then I would start to like reflect on what I said during the interview. So even before hearing, yes or no, I was already sort of in the reflection process. Um, and sometimes I would be a little hard on myself, but I would try not to. I would think, well, you kind of got nervous and you answered that question weird, but um, I try to remember that a lot of these times people are like generally rooting for you. I don't think anybody's really like sitting back there being like, I can't wait for this person to slip up and say something stupid, Um, People want you to do well. And so I would remind myself that and think about my answers, think about like questions that I got asked that I wasn't expecting and maybe wasn't prepared for, and considering that for like potential next interviews. Because there was a couple of things where, I was asked something and I wasn't really, I was kind of put on the spot and maybe didn't give the best answer. I tried to pay attention to like trends or not trends, but like things that I was seeing happening over and over again in interviews. So, there was a lot of focus on instruction. So I knew that I needed to um, have an answer that could speak to my experience, but also speak to my experience honestly and like explain my like willingness to like grow into that. Um, so paying attention to stuff like that was really helpful. And then once I, heard yes or no. And, you know, it was no a lot before there was the yes, but I would always follow up with an email thanking them for their time, asking for any feedback that they might give me, if they're willing to do that. Sometimes folks would give me feedback and it was exactly what I expected it to be, you know, like we were just, you know, maybe looking for someone with more experience or something like that. But there was some stuff that, you know, it was just like, sometimes they're like vague about that. I did have somebody who was like, well, like we can't really give you any information about like the other like applicants. But but we went with them. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Um, so yeah, just asking for feedback was really useful. I also made a point to reach out to whoever it was on the search committee that was heading that, uh, and like send them sort of a personal like thank you. I know that with the position that I have now, my colleague Maggie was the one who um, was communicating with me. She was the one who showed me around Greensboro and like took me to my next destination every time like I was meeting a new group when I had my on-campus interview. And reaching out to her personally to thank her, I thought was a really good thing to do because she was just like very helpful in like keeping me calm. And by doing so, she also was able to like, you know, kind of reach out to me and reassure me that I did well. I'm not saying that that's like what will happen if you do that, like you should thank them anyway, but it was nice to hear that. Um, so yeah, I think definitely reaching out. I see in the chat you said, did you keep a log or journal of any kind? Um, I guess not like an official journal, but I definitely took notes whenever like after I had an interview and I got a no, I would sort of take notes of like what they said, what I need to work on, and maybe what questions I need to be better prepared for the next interview.
Idea. And that's very helpful. Something that I haven't done previously is to think reflectively about my own experience. So 5 minutes left. Is there anything that you wanted to share that we didn't cover or that you think would be important for students who are either going out into the job market right now or who have been out for a while and are kind of getting discouraged and that we didn't cover that you think would be really useful?
I would suggest um, trying to get some type of experience in the library. Um, I know that can be easier said than done because I remember I was even sending emails to all the libraries around that was like, listen, I will work for free for you. Like I can do anything that you like need me to do. And like I still wouldn't hear back sometimes. Um, but I do think that there is always somebody who who could use an extra hand. And I know that I also feel like a little complicated about suggesting that you should offer free labor, but I I think maybe even if it's just like shadowing somebody for a couple of days, that could be useful just to get some good insight. Um, I think any kind of experience that you can get, you should take advantage of. Hopefully, it is something that is, you know, a paid internship, because I do think that you should get paid for you should be compensated for that. But I understand that's not always the case. My internship that I did was not paid, um, and it was it was not cheap for me because it was in New York, which is kind of how I got involved with ACRO New York. So I had to stay in New York City for 2 months, and like use up a lot of my savings to do that. And I don't really recommend like using all your savings to do an internship. But that was a decision that I made. And I do think that the internship was very helpful, but hopefully you can get into a situation where, you're either being compensated or it's not like asking too much of you, but at the same time, you're still getting some like enriching experiences. Um, yeah, so any sort of experience, even like I mentioned, if it's just shadowing, looking for a mentor, asking people. I know that we have some student workers who are working closely with a librarian, sort of just they are working together because we have our like interns in the library, but then there's people who work closely with a specific librarian. So if you can get into a situation like that, that might be good depending on like what kind of job you want to go into. But yeah, I think experience is a big one because unfortunately, what I noticed was that a lot of entry level positions were being filled by people who had lots of experience, or at least 2 to 3 years of experience, and not actually entry level people. So I think there's sort of like some competition there.
Megan, if you want to add something, you go ahead.
Yeah, it's been helpful for a lot of students that I've worked with to, before it gets to panic mode, when you've got like a clear head about the process, to really set some like realistic timelines. So think about your financial situation. By what time do you have to have an opportunity? And by what time would it be nice if you had an opportunity, right? So for some of us, we need that check immediately. What am I going to do? For some folks, you've got savings set up, or you have a job that's bringing in income right now, and so you can wait a little bit longer. But if you can determine what your like final date is, then you can get some more like perspective really about, if I'm a month out from my deadline, how does that change the positions I'm applying for? Or how does that change my approach, right? So if I've been using this resume and I'm not getting any interviews, is it time for me to change it? Or I've been getting all of these interviews and something isn't working. Do I need to work on that? Or you've been applying for those things that are exactly what you want. Do you need to compromise some of that stuff, right? So making this timeline will let you know at what point in your job search process do you need to edit some of the things that you're doing. And I want to just kind of reiterate what Melody has been saying. There's so much that's out of your control, and you have to get it in your mind that you can control the things you can control, right? You can control what you apply for, what your documents look like, how prepared you are, but you cannot control who else is applying, what the job market looks like, what questions they're going to ask you. So you have to, feel confident about the things that you can control. And part of what you can control is what you know, right? So making that timeline and making sure will be really helpful as you're moving forward, especially right now when we have so many questions about what the market will look like.
Thank you. That's really great. And I just wanted to say thank you to Melody and Megan for attending, and Melody for answering all the questions. And I'm sure that people are going to really appreciate watching this video and getting advice from you. So I just wanted to say thank you for some time this morning just going through questions with
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will kind of just as the larger announcement for anybody that is interested, the video to our career website career resources for LISSA. And you can find that video there. Okay, so that is it. I really appreciate that you guys came and joined me this morning, and hope to see you guys soon. If not face to face, then through email maybe. Okay.
Thank you.